Yo people, welcome back to Ron's Tech Hub, and today I'm going to be looking at the Raspberry Pi Pico 1. Yeah, that's right, the Raspberry Pi Pico 1 in 2025 having brand new specs. And you might be asking, how is that even possible for a hardware device to have new specs? Let me explain. The Raspberry Pi Pico is the first microcontroller that the Raspberry Pi company ever released. It was released back in January of 2021, and I remember this very well because I was like, wait, Raspberry Pi makes single board computers, why are they doing microcontrollers? And when I compared the specs of the Raspberry Pi Pico then to the most popular microcontroller at the time, which was probably the Arduino Uno, the Arduino Mega, I was like, whoa. The Arduino Uno has a 16 megahertz processor, right? So 16 million times per second. And then the Raspberry Pi Pico had a 133 megahertz processor, so 133 million times per second. And it was dual core. So technically, if you could get it working properly, 266 million times per second. And it was only like £5. So it was crazy. Before we get into the change in specification, I think we need to explain or define the term specification first. So the term specification generally means or refers to a detailed and precise description of something. It outlines the requirements, characteristics, or criteria that a product, process, or service must meet. For example, this processor will be able to run at 133 megahertz safely and consistently. So that was the original spec for the Raspberry Pi Pico. Now, if you think, how did hardware change what it can do? This is actually quite common. A new software update can change the performance of hardware either negatively or positively. We've seen negative hardware updates massively in the past. For example, NVIDIA's drivers, sometimes they get worse with some games, sometimes they get better. Change that we've seen in the Raspberry Pi has been a positive change. So the Pico 1, the RP2040, can now run at 200 megahertz. And again, this costs £5 to £7. The Arduino Uno, which costs the cheapest I've ever seen one, I have a couple of them. The cheapest I've ever seen them is roughly about £10 to £15, and those run at 16 megahertz. People have been overclocking for a very long time. This is nothing new. And let me quickly explain what overclocking is. So let's just say, for argument's sake, you buy a processor, a GPU, something, and the speed that they tell you it can run at is, let's use a random number, 100, right? Overclocking is where you find a way to increase that number from the specified 100 to whatever number that you see fit within reason. So for example, sometimes you can get a processor to go from, let's say, 2.5 gigahertz to 3.0 gigahertz without doing anything extra to the hardware. You simply install software, tweak a few voltage values, and you should be good to go. That's roughly what overclocking is. So the new Pico SDK, which is version 2.1.1, allows the Pico's processor to run 50% faster. Remember, it goes from 133 megahertz to 200, so it adds an extra 67, which is roughly 50% off the 133 that it had before. At present, the date is February 21st, 2025. This only works for C/C++. It should come to MicroPython and CircuitPython later on down the line. I'm not even worried about that. It will come. This is just amazing. So the real world performance might not be 50% because there are other factors that might play into it. So for example, the RAM that it has, how fast the RAM is, and this is not a real world 50% faster. It's just that the processor, one single component of this device, is 50% faster. RAM and the speed of the RAM might also play into how fast it is in real world performance. So this here is a link to the new SDK 2.1.1. Again, this is February 21st, 2025. As I mentioned before, overclocking was always an option, but now it is officially supported at the new clock speed. So the Raspberry Pi people, the Raspberry Pi company, has now said this board can now run at 200 megahertz. You're getting a 50% performance increase for paying nothing extra other than simply plugging it in, changing a few values, and you're good to go. Obviously, I'm making the assumption that they've increased the value and found a good voltage after extensive testing. So the Pico 2 was released in 2024. I don't remember what month exactly, but I have a few of them here. So I believe that this update, this SDK, will trickle up or down. I'm not sure because it's a Pico 2. I'm not entirely sure, but this will trickle up or down. And the Pico 2 is already significantly fast. We could also see a 50% increase. It doesn't have to be 50%. It could be some random arbitrary value based on the technology within the Pico 2. But whatever the case is, I think there's going to be some form of increase later on. And obviously someone will get doom working on this thing. I'm going to make this link available in the description and you guys can go ahead and watch this video. This guy does a really good breakdown of the Raspberry Pi Pico versus the Pico 2. So you can see why this increase is so important for the Pico 1, because that means that this same increase might potentially come to the Pico 2, which will make it a stupidly fast processor. This is a conversation I've had with colleagues of mine, and I would say the Raspberry Pi is greater than the Arduino. They would say Arduino is greater because it's just been out there for longer, but I think, this is just my opinion, students or people new to microcontrollers, Raspberry Pi, not just a single board computer, but the microcontroller as well. So that's the RP2040, the Raspberry Pi Pico 1, or the RP2350 Raspberry Pi Pico 2. It's much easier to get into. Number one, it is really well supported. The documentation that they have on the website is so good. I sat down and read sections of it and I was like, wow, this is very good. The detail, free, available out there. You don't need to go trolling the internet. It's on their main website. I think the barrier of entry is going to be easy. I mean, I'm not saying £15 is going to be crazy money and it's going to break the bank for some people. However, £5, £6, £7, and you get something this powerful. The most powerful Arduino I found was running roughly at 700 megahertz, and that cost like £20 to £30. Now we're going to have the Raspberry Pi Pico hopefully at some point running at above 400 megahertz, and it's only going to cost £7 or £8. Now you might think that that's not that big of a deal, but if you're mass marketing something and you can buy one version that runs C and C++ and it costs you £8, and another version that also runs C and C++ but it costs you £20 to £30, decision is going to be pretty simple depending on how stable and well supported these devices are, of course. And again, my argument was the Raspberry Pi Pico 2 is going to be overpowered for most entry level projects and also for most mid-level projects. Again, speaking about students, I'm a teacher, so I'm always going to go back to what students are going to want to do. For me, I'm going to say for students, this is the perfect device in many ways. I'll make this PowerPoint available on my website at some point. I'm also going to put these links in the description, so if you want to go verify what I'm saying, please click on the links, read the articles. They're very interesting. I find them very interesting. Thank you guys for watching and have a nice day.